All right, live hours after our show ended last week, the verdicts began rolling in on former President Donald Trump's hush money case, and it was pretty across the board. 34 convictions on 34 charges. We are truly in unprecedented territory here, folks. So what does this mean for Trump? What does this mean for the election? And most importantly, what does this mean for America? Also, a new report was released that shines even more light on the COVID lab leak theory and the role the United States played in funding that research. Join us as we talk about all these topics and more on episode 452 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I am doing pretty well. I got to say, I am in a bit of a frisky mood today. Frisky is a good way to put it. I was on the Cut Jib newsletter podcast, which is part of the Ace of Spades HQ blog yesterday. It just published, I think, either yesterday afternoon or this morning, talking about some of the issues we're going to talk about today. So, after listening to this podcast, listen to the Cut Jib newsletter podcast and see which one is the angrier Jim. I'll try to do my best to get him as even as possible, but it's going to be pretty pissy today.
Yeah, there's two options. He either blew off all of his steam on yesterday's podcast, he's going to come into this one a little bit more even keel, or he just practiced last time. He's going to come in even more full force this time. So put your money on one or the other. I don't know. We'll see. Also joining us, we have Chris Talgo, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
Well, I'm doing good today because 80 years ago, on this very day, tens of thousands of brave young men stormed the beaches of Normandy and eventually freed Europe from Nazi occupation. And, I just think that that's something that we need to really remember on this day. And, we wouldn't be here. We would not have these freedoms without those people, without the sacrifices that they made. Tom Brokaw called them the greatest generation. He was 1000% correct about that. The sacrifices that they made will live on in eternity, and we should all be extremely grateful for the sacrifices that they made so that we can live in freedom.
Yeah, 80 years ago. So I think that's when Joe Biden was entering his fifth or sixth year in Congress. So that is also a nice little factoid for you to know on this day. But
just one other quick thing on this note. No, I'm serious because this is very important. I think we look back 80 years later and think, oh, well, there was no question that the Ally invasion of Normandy would be successful. And that is completely 1000% not true. Sure. The Germans had, built-in pillboxes. They had something called the Atlantic Wall. They had the advantages across the board. This was the largest naval operation in history to this day. We're talking thousands and thousands of ships and planes, and it's all had to be coordinated. That could have gone awry so easily. And Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was in charge of that operation on D-Day, he wrote two letters. One was D-Day being a success. One was it being a failure. And I just think that all these years later, we just look back and think, of course it was a success. That was not set in stone. So let's just always remember that, freedom takes major sacrifice. And the men on that beach who went into that beach knowing that they were, going to die as soon as they got off those duck boats, we owe them just such a debt of gratitude. And there's only a couple hundred of them left. This is the last time that they will ever have this honor that they are so rightfully due. And I just really hope that, more Americans, thank them for that.
It's a good point because in hindsight, you have this kind of illusion that everything was just kind of like that's just the way that things were and all of that. But yeah, I mean, who knows? Just one degree of difference could have been we could be sitting here talking in German right now. so I fully understand what you're saying. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of the listeners of this podcast who are American patriots know a lot about what happened on June 6, 1944. And actually, it was supposed to be June 3rd, 1944, but the weather was crap and would have made an already never before seen amphibious assault on a continent, as Chris pointed out, never attempted at that scale before and never attempted at that scale since. So Dwight D. Eisenhower had to organize and plan and be ready for success or failure. And he decided, no, weather's too bad this day. And in fact, the weather's going to be crappy on June the 7th. So this is the day we got to go. And, I'm sure a lot of people, it's funny. If you believe in God looking out over America or over freedom, there's lots of examples of that when it comes to war, as strange as that sounds. George Washington believed that there are angels in the whirlwind looking over the United States. The founding fathers believed that the country they were founding was divinely blessed. And there is a lot of it seems that there seems to be some divine intervention on June 6, 1944 as well. Edwin Rommel, the best general that the evil Nazis had, was convinced that the landing was going to be in Calais because that was the closest by land to the British Isle. And of course, they famously set up inflatable tanks to fool the surveillance airplanes from the Germans coming over. They were convinced that George Patton, the most feared general on the Allied side, was going to lead the attack, and he was going to come over in Calais. And so they had most of their reinforcements ready there and not on Normandy. And Rommel, he wanted his wife's 50th birthday was that day. So he went back to Berlin to celebrate it with her and missed the D-Day landing. And that affected communications and the ability of the Germans to repel, to basically slaughter the Allies and send them back into the rough seas from which they came. And then Hitler himself had gone to bed and did not rise until 9 a.m. the next morning. By 9 a.m., most of the work, the hard, deadly work on the Normandy beaches had been accomplished. And so it was too late. And the communications, they really couldn't take any actions without the Fuhrer's okay. And so, Hitler slept in that day. And that was a bad day for the Nazis to have all of those factors happening to them. And so if you believe in divine intervention, I believe God was on the side of the good guys, of the Allies, on this day 80 years ago. And Chris is right. There's hardly a generation of soldiers and sailors that deserve more admiration and respect than those who landed on D-Day. And I'm glad they're getting that today. And by the way, President Biden traveled over to France today, and he was there for a ceremony today. So it was nice that the United States was representative. I don't think it was as memorable in a good way as Ronald Reagan when he went there on the 40th anniversary, but still a historic day for a president.
Yeah, I think we have some footage of that. Maybe we could play that a little bit later. Don't want to mar this, very, very kind of flowery address of this day with the clips that we have prepared of Biden celebrating that too. So we'll save that for a little bit later. But we do have a lot. We do have a lot to talk about on this episode. But before we get going, I have that note that I mentioned at the beginning of all of these podcasts. And partially goes out to those audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later. That first off, why don't you leave a review for us on iTunes? That would be greatly appreciated. You could also join us a day earlier where we are live streaming this on Thursdays at noon Central Time on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. If you want to join the conversation, you can throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. We also have that super chat functionality enabled if you want to support the show that way. If you don't want to spend $1, but just want to spend a couple of seconds helping the show, hitting that like button, subscribing to this if you haven't already, sharing this content, or just leaving a comment under the video, all help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. But let's get right into it, because this, like I said, this is a story that broke like literally maybe an hour, maybe a couple of hours after we ended last week's broadcast. But Donald Trump is now facing, he was facing 34 charges relating to the hush money case, to the infamous Stormy Daniels and the way those funds were allocated. And I don't know, maybe we can get into like the specifics of that, but the charges were based on very shaky legal ground. So shaky, in fact, that at least one anti-Trump person I know dismissed this entire thing as just a farce. But despite the expired statute of limitations on this crime that nobody seems to be able to articulate, Trump was convicted by 12 jurors in the Democratic stronghold of New York City on charges brought by a George Soros-funded DA. In fact, Trump was convicted on all 34 charges. So, Jim, in the hours after the podcast last week, when this news started rolling in, I can't imagine you were all that surprised, were you?
No, I wasn't surprised. This was the result that we all expected, and it was without a doubt the most egregious misjustice, misuse of our justice system in American history. I had tweeted somewhere that Stalin and Beria from the Soviet Union would be proud, and I got pushback saying, well, Stalin and Beria killed millions of people. We're not doing that in the United States. And yes, point well taken, moron. The point of that was that the way this trial was conducted would have made Stalin and Beria proud for their show trials that they did in the 1930s and sent people to gulags on trumped up BS charges, of which all of this was. You know, one of the most absurd and funny parts about this is that in the Soviet Union, they may have only charged Donald Trump with maybe one or two, maybe at most 4 crimes, right? Because that's all you need. And if you're guilty, off to the gulag you go. No. Alvin Bragg has to charge Donald Trump with 34 felonies, 34 fake felonies, one for every check that he wrote and one for putting it in the ledger, as if he's sitting at a desk like Ebenezer Scrooge in a Christmas Carol with George C. Scott, scribbling the checks all by himself and putting them in the ledgers like he was actually doing these things. Which means that if he had written checks for $1 each to Stormy Daniels, he would have been charged with 130,000 felonies. And so that is just one level of the absurdity of this whole thing. It is not a crime to have a non-disclosure agreement and to pay hush money to keep an affair quiet, even if it is to influence an election, which of course everything a candidate does is to influence an election. And to elevate these misdemeanors into a case, a federal case at all, or it was a state case, of course. But the federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York took a pass because they knew that this was BS. The Federal Election Commission, which has authority over the violation of election laws, they took a pass because they knew it was BS. And so it took a vindictive, partisan, corrupt justice system in the city of New York to get their 34 felony convictions, which weren't felonies, not even crimes, and they got their man. And now, when all of this has now happened, people keep saying, well, they're not really going to put Trump in jail, are they? They're not going to take it that far. You've come all the way to here. The idea that they're going to stop short of sentencing Donald Trump to prison after all of this is absurd. They got their mugshot. They got their 34 felony convictions, and now they want their picture of Donald Trump in handcuffs and leg irons in an orange jumpsuit being escorted away from everybody else and taken out of society. That is what they want. That is what I think we will see, unless there's a small chance that the judge sentences him to like 70 years in prison or whatever number they want to throw out there that is absurd, and then declare it a suspended sentence. Alan Dershowitz brought that up on Megyn Kelly's show the other day, and I think that's probably a pretty good guess of what's going to happen. They want him sentenced to prison. And the idea that the best that could happen out of here right now is that he would only have a suspended sentence, meaning he doesn't go to prison, actually. He's let free, or he'll have an ankle bracelet on, which I think this is actually perfect. Because if you thought that the Trump supporters got excited and made T-shirts out of Donald Trump's mugshot and made it a rallying cry for him, the absurdity of imprisoning the leading candidate for president against the most unpopular president we have seen in a long time, who is a complete failure, if they think that is a winning electoral strategy, is going to blow up in their face.
Yeah, Chris, I'm curious of your takes on this, and we can touch specifically on some of the things that you brought up, Jim. But it just seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but generally speaking, as long as Donald Trump has been on the political scene, he has split, like, even conservatives, right, or Republicans, whatever you want to call it. Or he'll do something, you'll get half of Republicans they'll say, like, oh, it's the right thing. Other half say that it's not. On this issue, it almost seems like he's got himself a consensus support that this is all BS. Even the people that are like anti-Trump just see through this as being like a show trial, and it's the trumped up charges, all of that. Maybe there's an exception to that. I'm not sure I've seen it yet. What are your thoughts, Chris?
The verdict has definitely galvanized the Republican Party. You've got Nikki Haley coming out and supporting Donald Trump now. You've got even Mitt Romney saying that this trial was a farce. I'm going to go back and answer your original question. I was surprised. I thought that at least one person would hold out on that jury and say, you know what, I can't do this. I can't vote this man guilty on this ridiculous non-crime. Two of the jurors also happen to be lawyers. So I thought maybe one of them would, take it upon themselves to say, listen, this is wrong, because they know the law. They know that this was, not a crime. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But one of the reasons why is because the judge gave jury instructions that made it almost impossible for them to not come to that conclusion. And that's very important, because the judge from the get-go did not allow the Trump defense team to allow witnesses, to allow evidence that would have supported his position. And he went out of his way to allow salacious details and salacious testimony by Stormy Daniels, by Michael Cohen, even though that had nothing to do, the Stormy Daniels portion at least, had literally nothing to do with what was at trial. So this was a rigged trial from the beginning. Even the way that the judge was picked for this, the way that it's supposed to work, you're supposed to have a random lottery, and there's supposed to be, I think, 20 or so judges in that area, that region, that district, whatever, who are supposed to, randomly be assigned to these trials. Guess what? Judge Marchand was not even in that pool, yet he was picked for this, and he also happened to serve as Steve Bannon's judge, and he was also in one of the other Trump trials. I can't remember if it was the E. Jean Carroll or whatever, but what are the odds of that? Almost zero, slim to none. So this was completely rigged from the beginning. Let's also not forget that Alvin Bragg, when he was running for district attorney, said that he would do this, and then he went ahead and did it. But what's even more interesting is when he first won after his election to district attorney, he came out and said, you know what, actually the evidence is not there. We can't do this. Guess when he actually started to follow through with this case? A couple of days after Donald Trump announced that he would run for re-election in 2024. Right. So all this, I mean, this is not just what's going on in New York. Same thing going on in Atlanta. Same thing going on in almost all of these cases. There's a total double standard. We live in a two-tier justice system that is just, evident on its face by now. And I think the American people are going to make their sentiments known that they don't agree with this come November 5th. And I think we're also seeing in some of the early polling that's coming out after this, there's been no bump for Biden. Actually, according to some of the polls that I've seen, Trump has gained 2 points in several of the swing states. So this has not benefited the Biden campaign.
Yeah, how much money did he end up bringing in like that next 48 hours?
So in the 24 hours after, it was $52.8 million. That is the biggest fundraising haul in a 24-hour period for a presidential candidate ever. And even more importantly, 30% of those donations came from small dollar donors. We're talking like $30 or less, who had not actually ever donated to the Trump campaign before. So what you've seen is that there are a whole bunch of Americans who are saying, "Wow, I cannot believe that this is actually happening before my eyes, and I am going to put my money where my mouth is, and support Donald Trump, with my my money." So I think when it comes time to go to the polls, if someone's already donated 20, 30, 40, $50 to the Trump campaign, it's almost assured that they're going to vote for Trump come November 5th. So I think that this has just been a complete and utter backfire on the Biden campaign.
Doug Troyer in the comments said it's over $200 million now. So it's been a week. I mean, we have to double check that number, but I trust Doug. So 200 million in the week since this the convictions came down. Chris, Jim said in his kind of opening statements on this that he thinks that it's likely that that he'll be facing some jail time. We have to wait for the sentencing. It's like in July or something like that.
4 days before the Republican National Convention, by the way.
We will get to that.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But Chris, are you as confident as Jim is that there'll be some prison sentencing for this?
Oh, geez. I mean, I just don't know the answer to that. I mean, if you were to ask me if he would be found guilty, I would have said no. So I don't think that he'll go to jail, but nothing should surprise us at this point. I mean, I don't know. I mean, who knows if it would be home confinement, if it would be going and serving on weekends, like whatever. Regardless of the punishment, even if it is home confinement or, he's going to have to, get a probation officer, and everywhere he goes, he's going to have to, request permission. This is going to impact his ability to campaign. So I don't know if that's actually going to result in less campaign events, or if he's going to, just campaign in places where he's, allowed to go. But I think that this is, once again, I don't think that this is going to have the effect that the Biden team wants it to have, because right afterwards they came out and said convicted felon, convicted felon. That's not resonating with the American people. The American people know that this was a sham trial. So I think even if it did go to that level where they did say, okay, you're going to spend a couple months in jail or whatever, I think that would actually just have more of a boomerang effect for Trump at this point.
Yeah. So Jim, you mentioned that the sentencing is 4 days before the GOP convention. So, as anyone that follows any court cases should know that, when the convictions come down, it's a later date usually that like the sentencing will be that'll occur. Sometimes it's a week later, sometimes it's a couple of weeks later. In this case, it's like 6 weeks later. I'm not sure how normal that is. And yeah, it just happens to line up 3 days before the GOP convention. And Jim, you and I have been we've been watching some Game of Thrones stuff recently, and not to suggest that our political system is anything like the political systems of fake fictional Game of Thrones world or anything. But I could just imagine in that universe, somebody is talking to Donald Trump and saying, "Hey, you've got between now and July 11th or whenever the sentencing is to basically suspend your campaign or you're going to jail." I'm not suggesting that's what's happening, but it just seems so perfect considering the GOP convention is 3 days, 4 days later. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I mean, I think if we lived in a real world Game of Thrones world, that Donald Trump would have been immolated by a dragon by now. So they would have taken out. That's how they take out their opponents in Game of Thrones. But look, I'm the resident grumpy old man and pessimist on this podcast. And no one is coming for my title. And every time I am the most pessimistic about something, and sometimes the most grumpy and angry about something, I end up being proven correct. It's inconceivable to me that his sentencing was set for look at the calendar. Let's see. Yeah, the 11th. So the 11th. Yeah. So that's the Republican National Convention starts the following weekend. That's on a Thursday. And so it is inconceivable to me that his sentencing date was set because the judge can set it anytime he wants. I know it's normal to maybe wait a couple weeks or something for sentencing. But the judge is in charge of his courtroom and all of the proceedings therein. And so he could have sentenced him right there. And so putting it off until July 11th is not a coincidence. Nothing in any of the legal cases against Donald Trump are coincidences. This is all done to stop Donald Trump from returning to the White House. And frankly, it's even worse than that, because it's not intended to stop him, because the people can stop Donald Trump from returning to the White House by choosing, old Joe Biden instead. But our ruling class, our legal system, the hard left that seems to run every important institution in this country, private and government, is determined to do whatever it takes, even illegal activities, to stop him from getting to the White House again. And so that's why the sentencing is July 11th, because it gives them some time to figure out what's the best way to issue a sentence that would stop him. It's not about justice. It's not about whether he deserves jail or doesn't deserve jail. It gives them time to figure out and read the tea leaves and see what is the most effective strategy to keep him out of the White House. Is it a suspended sentence? Is it actually putting him in Rikers Island for holding before he goes to maybe a state prison in upstate New York somewhere? Do we want that orange jumpsuit and the leg irons photograph to go viral? Maybe we don't want that. I think that might galvanize the Trump supporters even more. So maybe we should just not sentence him to any jail time at all. Maybe we'll do it as community service or something else like that. And so this entire farce, from the Georgia case to the E. Jean Carroll case, in which they, supposedly he's guilty of some sexual assault or something, the state of New York passed a law to extend the statute of limitations just so they could prosecute this against Trump and against nobody else. Just like the case Letitia James, the Attorney General of the state of New York, went after the Trump Corporation. And then Kathy Hochul, the governor, assures everybody, don't worry about it. We're not coming after your businesses. We're only coming after this one. So the entire justice system, the left, the Democratic Party, the powers in control of everything in our society have decided that they will sacrifice almost 250 years of proper judicial procedure in this country to get one man and to stop that one man. Even John Adams, one of our founding fathers, when in the Boston Massacre, he defended the British troops because he saw that was the only way, and especially if he did it, that was the only way to assure the country that our justice system will, no matter what, even defending properly the enemy of the United States in a time of extreme strife and tension and violence. John Adams thought it was so important to uphold our sense of justice in this country and to separate America from corrupt regimes that he personally defended them. And look where we are now. Now we have people who are temporarily entrusted to offices like Attorney General or United States Attorney in a federal court, or a judge. And by the way, Judge Merchan is an acting judge. He's not even a permanent judge, and he gets 3 of the Trump cases. If there is any sense of justice, if God is looking down on this country as he did in the founding times and looked down upon Normandy Beach, if God is smiling upon this country, I would hope and I pray that this destruction of what it is to be America, of what it is to have a just legal system, will not prevail, and that this has to be reversed. You cannot just make an exception for the evil orange man and have a justice system that works for the rest of us, because we already have a 2-tier justice system. And one of the things that people are realizing is that there are hundreds of political prisoners from, let's just say there was an incident in the Capitol in January a while back. And those people have been subject to the same unjust, corrupt legal system, just like Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's not alone in this. There are hundreds of others, and this has to change. And if the elections don't turn out in a way that I think everybody listening to this podcast would like them to, I really do fear for what this country will become. Because if you reward this sort of behavior, if you reward this lawlessness, this destruction of our American system, all you're going to do is get more of it. It must be pushed back on, and frankly, it must be punished.
Yeah, the idea of community service, I think, is a good idea. In fact, he shouldn't be wasted just like picking up garbage on the side of the road. Maybe he should like serve the public in like a really high office or something like that. Like maybe even president. That'll show it. That'll show everybody. We'll make him be president. That'll be the community service that he has to do.
You know, the juxtaposition between how Alvin Bragg handles ordinary crime in New York City, which is being overrun with crime, versus how he treats a white collar or, you know, non-crime from 2006 is just so striking to me. Because, you know, the left, especially after the 2020 George Floyd riots and all this stuff, was all about, we don't want to put people in jail, and the criminal justice system is, you know, too harsh. However, they are using every single tool of the criminal justice system to go after someone for nothing. This is not a violent, you know, person by any means. However, we see in New York City almost every day on the subways, we see people being assaulted, people being attacked, people being raped, you know, illegal immigrants assaulting police officers. And Alvin Bragg does not care about that. He gives them a free pass. So I think the American people see through this, and they see that this is not a you know, a fair and balanced, you know, approach to justice. This is going after someone and trying to put anything they can to get that someone. You know, Ted Bundy was a mass murderer. He didn't face as many criminal cases as Donald Trump has. Just think about that for a second.
Sure.
Donald Trump is facing, you know, he's still facing criminal charges in Florida for the documents. He's still facing criminal charges in January 6th. He's still facing criminal charges in Georgia, and he's already been prosecuted on this, you know, bogus non-crime in New York. He's a sitting he's not a sitting. He's a former president who is the leading candidate, you know, running for the Republican nomination, and he's beating Joe Biden right now. This really reeks to me of desperation on their side, because they know we can't beat him at the polls. So the only way we can beat him is by ruining his reputation, or by preventing him from campaigning by, you know, keeping him, you know, stuck in courts, and then all the legal fees he's having to pay and just all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Because they know that if Donald Trump were to be running against Joe Biden one-on-one, mano a mano, without all this stuff, that it would just, I mean, it's going to be a landslide. I still think it's going to be a landslide.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking yesterday, Chris, and how, like, you know, when the Democrats' kind of talking point for the election is basically hinges almost 100% on this one thing. You know, Donald Trump's you know, court trials, the convicted felon, all of that sort of stuff.
But it's also funny that the Biden campaign issued a brand new campaign commercial yesterday. They did not mention this at all in once. You know what they did mention? They mentioned that the Biden administration is lowering prices. So they're trying to just gaslight us once again that inflation, the cost of living, is not a problem because Joe Biden's actually making it great. And if you don't know that, then you're just stupid and you're not getting our message, because they're out of options. So all they're trying to do is just browbeat us into thinking that, you know, that everything's hunky-dory, but everyone knows that everything is not hunky-dory.
Remember, the economy is better than what you think it is. Remember, everybody, you look up at the grocery store and you see prices going up. That's just an illusion. That's the main marketing tactic.
It shows me that they are very desperate.
I'm very curious about this, Jim. I want your opinion on this, because the reaction, I know, like, you know, tempers are running a little hot, okay, especially in Jim's office right now. But the reaction of this news from those right of center, like I said, has almost unanimously been critical of this whole situation. But the tone of that disagreement is the thing that varies wildly. So on one hand, you have those Republicans that are just content with publishing a tweet and calling the case a travesty. And then when they hit post on that tweet, they just move along with their day. But on the other side of things, you have people that are essentially calling for, like, political war. So there was one article that I had here in the show notes where it's talking about some of these people that are basically saying we got to fight fire with fire. So it outlines a handful of these. Stephen Miller, a former senior advisor to Trump, took to the air on Fox News calling for, quote, every facet of Republican Party politics and power has to be used right now to go toe-to-toe with Marxism and beat these communists. Steve Bannon, former chief strategist to Trump, wrote, there are dozens of ambitious backbencher state attorneys general and district attorneys who need to seize the day and own this moment in history by prosecuting Democrats. And even Marco Rubio posted that Biden is a demented man propped up by wicked and deranged people, and that it's now time to fight fire with fire. So I'm curious, Jim, what you think about this, because on one hand, it's easy to complain that Republicans often, tie an arm behind their back when it comes to fights like this, and instead they should take the gloves off and play by the same rules as the opposition. But on the other hand, are we really going to give in and embrace this era of unbridled political warfare? Can a country really stand when these sort of tactics are broadly embraced? What are your thoughts?
As you were wrapping that up, I was thinking of a line from Lord of the Kings, Return of the King, where King Theoden is reluctant to go to war, and Aragorn tells him, "War is upon you, whether you like it or not." Not quite the same quote, but very close to that. That war is upon you. That was certainly clear in Return of the King, and it is clear now. I'm frankly kind of sick and tired of the Republican Party laying back and taking it. I think they told Elizabeth I, lay back and think of England, when she wasn't really that much into guys. The Republican Party seems to be lay back and think of the Constitution, while the Constitution is being assaulted and torn to shreds right in front of their eyes. These are the new rules now. It is admirable that conservatives and the Republican Party would never dream of doing this kind of abuse of the justice system in this country just to get a single political opponent. That's admirable, and that was nice, and you should be able to look back on that in the past, while you're, in the future, when you're old and you're on your rocking chair, if there is still an America where you're allowed to do that and have your freedom. But that time is past. There should already be, if you are a state prosecutor in a very red city, in a very red state, let's say the Panhandle, let's say you're in Lubbock, Texas, in the Panhandle of Texas, there has got to be a way, and you better be investigating this right now, to bring up any Democrat anywhere, maybe a Democrat school board member, anybody, and bring them up on charges, call them felonies, have them arrested, have their mugshot and fingerprints taken, and rinse and repeat this in red jurisdictions all across the country until you have a huge pile of cases against Democrats for crimes, and you wouldn't have to make up crimes the way Alvin Bragg did in New York, or the way that Fannie Willis is inventing crimes in Atlanta, Georgia. There are Democrats who have committed crimes all over the place. Just like, you could say that we have so many laws on the books that everybody listening to this podcast probably commits about 3 or 4 crimes a day without knowing it, because there are so many statutes on the books.
That's
so exploit that. Exploit that and find these people. Ilhan Omar violated. She immigrated to this country under fraud. Bring her up on charges right now, and have her arrested. Have her mugshot taken, have her fingerprints taken, and have her have to deal with that for the next several years. What was it? Just last week, it was announced that I think 17 members of Congress had paid hush money to mistresses. Our tax money was used to pay off this hush money for illicit affairs. Who are these people? We need to know their names, and they need to be brought up on the same charges Donald Trump was just brought up on, and they need to be felony charges. But I have little faith that anybody on the right, any conservative, any Republican, is actually going to follow through on this. I just don't, because that's the pattern always, that the Democratic Party and Democrats in control of things like the legal system abuse it, use it illegally to punish their political enemies, whether they are politicians or just ordinary citizens who get out of line. This will continue unless and until the people perpetrating these injustices upon innocent Americans feel it themselves. It will not stop until they feel that pain themselves. That's the only way it's ever going to stop. Saying, oh my gosh, no, don't do this, that's un-American. That has no effect or influence on these people abusing their power to punish their political enemies. And the Republican Party is either going to get serious about this, or there's going to be another way to punish these people, whether it be a new political party or something else. And so I hope it's not that. I hope it's using the same system that has now been corrupted and weaponized against enemies of the government, of the regime. And unless and until that happens, this will not stop. That's the only way this will stop.
Chris, I want your take on this same question, because I think that this is kind of a bigger question that kind of underlies a lot of the conversations that are going on about this whole case. What are your thoughts?
Oh, geez, this is something I've been struggling with for many, many years. I completely understand where Jim is coming from, and it is time to fight fire with fire. However, there's still a piece of me that says don't do it, because, two wrongs don't make a right, and then you're going to be a race to the bottom. And so I can see both sides of the story here. I absolutely can. I completely understand the frustration on behalf of people who feel that the Democrat Party, by and large, gets away with bloody murder, and the Republican Party just puts its tail between its legs every single time and just lets it happen. Completely understand that. But do you want to live in a country in which then it is a race at the bottom, which both parties have become totally politicized, and all they try to do is, one up the other? A couple of years ago, this notion of, quote, owning the libs, started becoming popular. I hate that. I hate that phrase. It's not about owning the libs. It's about fighting for what's best, fighting for the truth. Who cares if it's, being espoused by liberals, Republicans, independents, whomever? It's like that's what we should always be, fighting for. And I'm sure that some people will call that extremely naive. And yeah, maybe 100 years ago that would have worked, but nowadays, we live in a dog eat dog world. Yeah, I mean, I get all that, but also the pendulum can swing back the other way. And if the Republicans choose not to engage in this lawfare and all this kind of stuff, maybe, just maybe, it would incentivize the people on the other side of the aisle to say, what we did was wrong, and we won't do it again. I don't know. I mean, that is, some people will look at it and laugh at that and say that is just completely unbelievable and never going to happen. You're out of your mind. But I don't know. There's just a part of me that thinks, and I've always thought this. And this is not to say that all Democrat voters think this way, but that by and large, the Democrat Party, in my opinion, ends justify the means. The Republican Party, on the other hand, we're principle-based. And I've tried to always live my life according to principles, not to say, what's the outcome I want? And I'll just do whatever I can to get to that outcome, because then you've compromised your principles. But if you say, these are the principles, and you just say, I'm going to live by them, like it or not, good or bad, at least then you can sleep well at night. At least then that you're doing the right thing. I try to live my life like that. So I would hope that the Republican Party would also try to, do that in terms of running and governing the country.
Yeah, it's a tough one, I will say. I mean, like my knee jerk reaction is kind of go Jim's roots. Like, nope, let's take the gloves off, that sort of thing. But I'm also sympathetic to the idea. It's like they punch us in the face, so we punch them in the face. It's probably going to lead to more punches, not them learning. One
other thing, instead of getting into the fray with them, I would much rather see, and I think that Donald Trump is doing this, and this is great. He's saying, I'm not going to do that. It's success. Success is going to be my revenge. And that really resonates with the American people, because the American people, by and large, they are not into these little, these little arguments like that we are. Most people do not pay attention nearly to the degree that we do.
Yeah, so, Chris, you brought up yesterday when we were talking about when Donald Trump, the whole lock her up thing in 2016, obviously a reference to Hillary Clinton and all the crimes that she committed and all of that. And then once Donald Trump got elected and got into a position where he could theoretically, unleash the Department of Justice against Hillary Clinton, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. It's just like now in this day and age, I wonder if he would change his mind on that. I'm very curious.
But I think that the American
Donald
people
didn't want to do that, because that would be crossing a Rubicon that should never be crossed in the United States of America.
Right.
But it's been crossed now. And so I hope Hillary Clinton is brought up on charges. There isn't a statute of limitations in effect, I don't believe, for the obvious federal crime she committed with classified materials and having her own private server and avoiding FOIA laws and all of that. Bring her up on all those charges and have her arrested day one. It is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But look, I'm tired of getting my head. I'm tired of getting my head kicked in by the left by doing illegal and improper and unconstitutional things, and then saying, "Well, I would hate to do that because I respect the Constitution. I respect the." Eventually, you're going to get kicked in the head so much you're going to die. I mean, the Constitution right now is almost a dead letter. And the way to protect it is to stop the other side from ever going down this road again. I'm willing to call a ceasefire after they have felt the pain of this. Then they will come to the table and start to agree to terms like the Constitution, terms like not weaponizing government agencies against your political enemies. You cannot bring them to the table by saying, with words. It has to be with action.
Jim's been watching too much Game of Thrones. Last word on this, Chris, and I want to move on to another topic.
Another thing is that there's only so much time in the day, and there's only so much that Congress can do and the president can do. So if you want them to spend precious time, going over, things of the past and trying to, get their political enemies, that's going to take a lot of time away from what they were supposed to be doing, and that is making our lives better. And Donald Trump has a lot that he can do to make our lives better. He can, get the border, closed. He can, deal with our terrible economy. I don't know if you can do both at once. And really what the Republican Party, when they took over the House a couple of years ago, they've shown that when they spend a lot of their time doing this kind of stuff, and some of this is because the media portrays them as, do-nothings who are just hell-bent on, picking old scabs. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think that their time would be much better spent saying, all we're going to do is pass bills that are that are broadly supported by the American people, and they're going to make your lives better. That's why I truly believe
that's a good point.
A contract with America 2024 would be a great way to run and say, listen, the other side, they want to distract you with these stupid shiny objects and make you, worry about Donald Trump paying $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. That has no bearing on your life. Who cares about that? You know what has a bearing on your life? The fact that gasoline is doubled. Right. The fact that you can't afford your bills. The fact that 78% of this country is living paycheck to paycheck.
Right. Yeah. It's like vote for us, and we're going to try to fix all your problems. Vote for them, and they'll chase down ancient things to try to get people that are politically disfavored in jail. Those are your two options, it seems like. But all right, we have to move on. This is already going to be a long episode.
It'll be a little long. That's fine. Just real quick before we move on to our second topic today. Thank you, Peter Williams, for £4.99 in the super chat. He says, I wish we could put Keir Starmer in jail for something in the UK. Keir Starmer is the leader of the opposition of the Labour Party in the UK right now. So I don't know much about that, but thank you very much for your contribution. And the rest of you all can do some super chats to help keep this show going as it goes. Thank you.
Yeah. And by the way, this is a trend that I've noticed on the Climate Realism show, which takes place at the same time, noon Central Time on Fridays. That we got a lot of donations coming in pounds, from the UK and all of that. Where's all of our American donors, people? Come on, don't let those Brits beat us on this one, huh? All right, so Donald Trump convicted. We're waiting for sentencing. He could still run. There's, obviously that even if he was thrown in jail, he could still run from jail. The only X factor there is whether or not the G.O.P party wants to just pull the rug out from under him. I think that's I don't think that's expected. Who knows? The idea that the sentencing is happening 3-4 days before the convention is interesting, but I still don't expect them to just nope, we're going to throw in somebody else to be. I don't think that's going to happen. So he's going to be the candidate. Who he's running against as of now is Joe Biden. And this is also pretty interesting. So there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out recently. And so I'm just going to start off by reading from it. It says this article is based on interviews from more than 45 people over several months. The interviews were with Republicans and Democrats who either participated in meetings with Biden or were briefed on them contemporaneously, including administration officials and other Democrats who found no fault in the president's handling of the meetings. Most of them said Biden performed poorly, were Republicans, but some Democrats said that he showed his age in several of the exchanges. So this basically outlines a whole bunch of recent stories of his declining mental state, his inability to have basic policy conversations without referencing his notes. In some cases, people wondered if he had fallen asleep during some of these meetings. Now, granted, we've talked about this stuff, throughout his whole presidency, even when he was running for election the first time around. But I still think it's undeniable that it's getting worse. Biden is currently the oldest person to ever be president. And there has been tons of talk over the last, year plus of whether or not he was going to be replaced on the ballot. The rumors swirled big time when Gavin Newsom was kind of making some campaign moves. But all of this has seemingly faded away as the election approaches. Now, there's a couple of interesting things, this article being one of them. The first debate that we talked about, I think last week, maybe the week prior to that, is going to be June 26th, I think, June 29th.
27th.
27th, June 27th, which is the earliest that one of these presidential debates has happened. And it's also taking place like a month and a half before the Democratic convention. So that's pretty interesting. And, when we were talking about the topics yesterday, Chris brought up the idea that there's some theories out there that people think that maybe one of the reasons why the debate is happening this early is because if Joe Biden has a terrible performance, they still theoretically have time before the convention to replace him on the ballot. How feasible that is, I don't know. But man, is he looking terrible. So, Chris, I'm going to start off with you on this one. Where are we at with this? Any chance he's not the guy on the Democratic ballot come November? What do you think?
Gosh, very difficult to say at this point. I can tell you what the polls say. The polls say the vast majority of Americans think he's too old. I was watching a segment yesterday, and they did a thing on this on NPR, and they asked a bunch of NPR listeners, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of Joe Biden? 2 said senile, 1 said old, 1 said concerned, and there were a couple other similar, words used. So even among his base, NPR listeners, they're terrified that he's just too old. And, we've seen this the past 3+ years. He struggles. He's struggling to put sentences together. He definitely is struggling to, maintain a vibrant, schedule. Yesterday, when he went to France, he called a lid on the day, I think at 11 o'clock a.m. as soon as he got off of Air Force One, which is strange because, like I told you, Donnie, there were a bunch of 100-plus-year-old veterans who had more activities in their day than Joe Biden, the president of the United States, did. It's just it's obvious. Everyone knows it. They are worried about it. It is a very valid concern. Like McCarthy said, when he meets with him, or when Kevin McCarthy did meet with him at the White House, he said that Joe Biden would bring stuff up from months ago, and he was like, no, we've already agreed on this. Like, this is not even what we're talking about. He said that he was constantly confused. He constantly had to refer to notes. He couldn't just talk off the cuff about subjects. He would read verbatim the note cards that his staff had written for him. Not only that, but when he goes to press conferences, they have pictures of the people he calls on. They have the questions pre-scripted. So everything about this shows that the American people know in their hearts that he's too old. That he's too old to be the president of the United States. And like I told you yesterday, there's been speculation in the mainstream media that the reason why they chose such an early date, the earliest date by far of any presidential debate, is because this would ostensibly be his last chance. And if he were to just do a horrible job, that they would say, okay, you know what, we got to change it. We still have time. We shall see. Donnie, I was telling you, in terms of the mechanics of that, I don't know if that's even possible that late in the game, because it takes lots of time to get your name on the ballot. So I don't know how they would do with that. And then also one other thing that is the elephant in the room here. If they do get rid of Joe Biden, who do they say Kamala Harris? Mm-hmm. Do they say Gavin Newsom? If they do not say Kamala Harris, you are now going to be our nominee. Can you imagine the outcry that will come from all the DEI, and all the people on the left who are just, all they care about is identity politics? So it's like, man, they are between a rock and a hard place here.
I think Klaus Schwab's got some free time coming up, but Jim, I'm curious of your thoughts on this. I mean, I know it would be unprecedented if this late in the game, a sitting president that's going up for re-election is just replaced on the ballot. But we're very squarely in unprecedented times here, so I'm not completely ruling it out. What are your thoughts on Joe Biden and his declining mental state?
Well, Christine Laurel in the comments had said that it's not about age, it's about or being too old. It's about having the mental capacity for the job, and I think that's right on the money, because Donald Trump is only, I think, 2 years younger, or 3 years maybe, than Joe Biden, and he obviously still has his mental faculties very much in hand. I came across this morning, reading some Twitter posts. I came across a video. Because the Hunter Biden trial is happening now, and the prosecution put into evidence the Hunter Biden laptop, which was called Russian disinformation by the regime. And in the debate that Donald Trump and Joe Biden had back in 2020, Joe Biden repeated that lie, that it was Russian disinformation and not real. But obviously it's real. The prosecution just put it into evidence in the gun trial against Hunter Biden. And just watching that clip on Twitter, the amount of mental decline just from then, from 2020 to 2024, is enormous. And even the mental decline from comparing 2020 to when he had left the vice presidency under Obama 4 years earlier was quite marked at that point. And now it's much, much worse. I do not think Donald Trump will be replaced on the ballot. As you said, there's a lot of impracticalities about that. It's actually just strange that, election laws in certain countries, I understand that Joe Biden, by some technicality, was not going to be on the ballot in Ohio. And that might still be something that they're working on to put him on the ballot because he missed some deadline. So the idea that you could replace Joe Biden at an open convention just doesn't seem very practical in the way we run our elections today. It should be that you can put anybody on the ballot after the convention. That's when you should be printing your ballots, and that's when the deadline should be. But so be it. Donnie, you and I are looking forward to the beginning of the second season of House of the Dragon on Max. And King Viserys in the end of season 1 was on his deathbed. He was barely coherent. He was taking lots of milk of the poppy just to make the pain go away, and it was incoherent. And yet, even on his deathbed, he was still king. So I believe that even on his deathbed, Joe Biden would still be the president for the Democratic Party, because from the drop of his administration, from the beginning of it in 2021, he has not been making the policy and running his own administration. This is Obama's third term. All of the people in place, either cabinet secretaries or especially the people in the office in the West Wing, are the ones doing policy, running policy, as that Wall Street Journal article. So now it's okay to say that, we have to have a talk with grandpa. That's the story that was in the Wall Street Journal, or was it New York Times, whatever, this week. Now it's okay to talk about his cognitive decline. You might think that that's because they're trying to lay the groundwork to replace him on the ballot, but you still have the problem of Kamala Harris. She would have to be the next one up. And I think they'd rather have a completely deteriorating, and we have video clips of that, by the way, of a man who cannot be in public. After what I saw today at the ceremony for the 80th anniversary of D-Day in Normandy, I can't imagine that there's going to be the proper mixture of stimulants and other drugs that they can give to Joe Biden to keep him coherent in a debate with Donald Trump on June 27th or whenever it is. I just don't see it.
Walk us through these clips. You prepared a couple of clips here. We keep teasing this Joe Biden at this D-Day ceremony. So
yeah,
Jim, take us through these.
All right. Well, so he was there for the D-Day ceremony, and just as he gets on stage, it looks like he might have done something in his pants. So I'm going to play that video. Here we go. shakes Macron's hand. And
distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin.
So he's looking like he was either trying to sit down in a chair that isn't there, or a lot of us have had elderly parents and grandparents, and we kind of know what that motion is. And the reason why I think it might be something as sad as that is because immediately afterwards, so the ceremony is still going on, and his his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, while the ceremony is going on, just takes him off of the stage. So here, let me play that. And off they go. I guess he needs to go, or he already went. And so here's Macron. He's like, wait, what's going on? Let's just know where to go. And then it's up to him to jump up there and to congratulate these brave heroes, these poise of Pointe du Hoc, because our president had to go. The ceremony was not near over. So despite this, and that's sad, that is frankly just sad. And despite this, it is sad. I'm sad, not angry about it. But despite all of that, and that's about it. And like I said, can you imagine that man standing up on stage for 90 minutes or 2 hours and having a debate with Donald Trump? I can't. I think it's more likely that debates will be canceled than it would be that that he would be taken off the ticket.
Yeah, it kind of explains a little bit why there's not going to be a live audience too, I think.
Yeah.
But all right, we're already at an hour, and it's in the thumbnail of the video that we are going to talk about this lab leak thing. So we have to talk about it. So we're going to go long. Bear with us, folks. But let's move on to this secondary topic here. This is a new report that has come out about the lab leak theory. I don't even know if we have to put theory there anymore, because this is like the 5th or 6th report that I think we've talked about on this podcast about the idea that COVID came from a lab in China, Wuhan. So I'm reading from a New York Post article here. It says a damning new report found that COVID-19 virus most likely leaked from a Chinese lab, and that the U.S. bears responsibility for pumping tens of millions of dollars into high-risk research on extremely infectious viruses at a facility with weak safety protocols. The analysis by Alina Chan, a Harvard and MIT molecular biologist, was published as a guest essay on the New York Times, a publication which has for a long time been skeptical and dismissive of the lab leak theory. Her findings paint an alarming picture of how the virus was sourced in China, supercharged for maximum infectiousness with the U.S. government support, and ultimately allowed to escape under inadequate containment conditions. So this just kind of seems like the consensus for the origins of COVID, right? I mean, we've covered on the show and previous reports that have essentially came to the same conclusion. Several government reports. I think one of the more recent ones was some government agency that you wouldn't expect to put out a report on the origins of COVID. It was like the Department of Energy or something like that. So it says here, Wuhan researchers collected samples from both infected humans and animals in an effort to learn more about the highly infectious nature of viruses like SARS-CoV-2. Much of this work was done in partnership with EcoHealth Alliance, a U.S.-based scientific organization researching infectious diseases, which the federal government has funded with more than $80 million since 2002, Chan wrote. The Wuhan lab's risky research involved, quote, genetically reconstructed and recombined virus samples collected across several different types of animals, resulting in never-before-seen infections that were repeatedly forced to mutate in order to survive in each of the new host species. The researchers published an extensive database about all of this in 2019, containing more than 22,000 collected samples. However, Chan notes, access to this data was shut off in the fall of that year and was not shared with American research partners even after the pandemic began. Chan's report also talked about the biosafety level of the lab and how it should have been at least a level 3 when dealing with pathogens like this. But the Wuhan lab only operated at a biosafety level 2, which focuses merely on protecting researchers against skin contact with the virus. So, I mean, come on. I'll go to you, Chris. Like, is this just the consensus at this point? And if it is, like, the academic consensus at this point is that it most likely came from a lab, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the consensus is in the minds of just like your general public out there. Like, so do you think, A, that this is the academic consensus at this point, and B, that has filtered down into the general knowledge base of like the population at large?
A couple things. First of all, I've read a few books, watched a couple documentaries, read many articles. All the evidence points that it came from the lab. Just a couple of things first before I get into your question. Peter Drozik, the EcoHealth Alliance director, was tight with Anthony Fauci, and he was the one who was receiving the funds to do these crazy experiments at the Wuhan lab. We also now know that the CIA was using him as a plant to see whether or not the Chinese government was using this lab to produce bioweapons. That has now come out. That is now a fact. So really, I think what happened was in the immediate aftermath of this, the Chinese government, because they're a bunch of liars, and then the American government, because they're also a bunch of liars, got together and said, man, we just made a huge mistake. Let's just cover it up. And that worked for a couple of years. But there were a whole bunch of people, including Tom Cotton, who right from the bat, and President Trump, who was president at the time, saying, no, it came from the lab. And when you just think about this, they're trying to tell us that it came from a wet market located a couple of blocks from the only lab in China that's a like super bio lab that just happens to work on coronavirus and use what Dr. Fauci said that they were not doing, which is genetic engineering of this virus to try to make it so that it would be more harmful, so that they could come up with a vaccine to prevent it in the first place. There are so many conflicts of interest here. Dr. Fauci also just so happens to get paid by drug companies for the vaccine. Gee, I wonder if that's not a conflict of interest. But I think any American with a brain who is not completely just under the thumb of the mainstream media looks at this and says, of course it probably came from the lab. Polling is also showing that more Americans are of that mindset now than before. So I think this is one of those things where it's just like a slow leak, and it's starting to get into the public opinion. And I think that the American people knew this from the beginning, but then they were like, well, but the mainstream media and the government is coming and saying, no, this did not happen. But now they're like, you know what? It just makes sense. And, Donald Trump said this from the beginning. Mike Pompeo said this from the beginning. Many people in the administration said that they were under the assumption that this came from the lab. And the fact that the Chinese have covered it up, that they have not played ball on this at all. The World Health Organization did an investigation of this. And their investigation initially said it came from the lab, but then they did a total about face and changed their tune on that. Just so happens that the Chinese government also supports the WHO with a lot of funding. So follow the money, and follow common sense. It is so obvious that this came from the lab. I don't know if it was leaked intentionally or not intentionally, probably by accident. But we've seen communist regimes throughout the history of their existence. Try to cover things up. When Chernobyl disaster hit, what did the Soviet Union do? They tried to cover it up and say, no, there's nothing happening here. They're just like, no. And then it was Western countries in Europe. I think it was in Sweden and Switzerland saying, what are you talking about? We're getting all this data that's saying that there's like huge amounts of radiation like coming our way. Like something happened. It took them weeks. The Soviet Union to finally admit to it.
Yeah, but what's so crazy is that, like, even in that scenario, and maybe I wasn't alive for that, but maybe in that case, it was similar to when like was the media in the United States been like, "Yep, we believe them. That's what the Soviet Union's saying." Don't look here. Don't look.
But you hit on such an important note, and I'm so glad you did, because I think that you have to go back to that early 2020. Anything that Donald Trump said, the mainstream media, Democrats, and academia and the experts in Hollywood automatically took the opposite stance. So whether it was the lab leak theory, whether it was ivermectin, on anything, masking, social distancing, closing down businesses, closing down schools,
Sure.
we now know that on all of those measures, those of us who were talking in terms of common sense, like, hey, no, we shouldn't shut down schools. Hey, no, masking probably doesn't work. Hey, social distancing doesn't work. We've been proven right on all that.
Right.
So why would you think that we've been proven right on all that? But then the most important aspect of it all, how it came into being, we were wrong on. I mean, that just literally, come on, just like common sense.
I know, but it's just so weird. So there's another story. I think I have the link in the show notes. You don't have to show it though. I'm just going to read some of the stuff from it. But there was another story that I want to talk about. That was a former White House coronavirus response coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx, was recently on CNN where she had said that there was an effort to squash the lab leak theory. She said, I think early on people did take a very definitive sides, and it did divide along party lines. And we're still suffering from that 4 years later, she told the host. So obviously we know in this case, we covered this a lot. Anyone that suggested this theory was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist or a racist. I remember even covering Jon Stewart when he went on Colbert late night show, whatever the name of that is.
Yep.
And he joked about how obvious it is that this came from a lab in Wuhan. And then he was shut down and ridiculed by Colbert during that same segment. And then in a podcast afterwards, like weeks later, Jon Stewart discussed how he was criticized after that segment for being racist against Chinese people and for aligning himself with conservative types that were suggesting this, the same theory. And it's just weird to me. Like some of the other ones that you mentioned, the shutting down businesses, the social distancing, the mask stuff, like that's still weird to me how like immediately partisan all of those things got. But like this one in particular is really surprising to me that like it just immediately got so partisan. Like it's because it's not immediately clear to me that the lab leak from China is some like conservative talking point, whereas like a wet market origins of the virus is some Democrat perspective. And yes, it does kind of make sense to me a little bit that it's just like whatever Donald Trump says, he's our North Star. We align all of our political ideologies with the opposite of whatever he says. Like that does make sense to me a little bit, but it does. But when you started off this talking about like kind of the cover up aspect of some of this stuff, I feel like that's a little bit more probably explains this a little bit more in terms of like just the ferocity that they defended this wet market theory.
And before Jim chimes in, just one more quick thing. You cannot understate the Dr. Fauci's implicity in this, and the fact that he was trying to cover up what he did, and he lied. And Rand Paul caught him in a whole bunch of lies, saying that he was never engaged in gene manipulation in the Wuhan lab. That is completely false. We know for a fact that they were doing this Frankenstein virus stuff. So I think that Dr. Fauci had a lot to lose.
Right.
And, we know for a fact now, because he's under oath again this week in Congress, and he admitted, oh yeah, that my number one assistant, he was not using government emails to communicate this kind of stuff. He was using Gmail, and then he deleted all those. Why did you delete those? So there is so much evidence pointing that Dr. Fauci got caught red-handed, because President Obama said no more of this genetic engineering of viruses. This is way too dangerous. Donald Trump also said no more of this. So what did Fauci do? He went around them, and he went to a 2-bit lab in communist China and said, well, you're still like letting this happen here, so I'm going to give you money to do it. And then Dr. Fauci even went before Congress and said, no, the money that we were giving to the Wuhan lab, they never used it for that. Well, money's fungible, Dr. Fauci, and you can't prove that, first of all. But second of all, then why did you go out of your way to lie through your teeth to us time and time and time again? Because you are responsible for this. So if anyone should be held responsible, it is Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, I think that there has been just... you mentioned watching documentaries and reading books on this. I feel like there needs to be like a worldwide investigation into this whole thing that brought upon all of this, because during the years of the pandemic, there was just like severe journalistic malpractice. And I feel like that term like understates it, because that almost makes it feel like they did it accidentally, and it wasn't like some sort of orchestrated pre-planned thing or something along those lines.
And they've never apologized for it. They never apologized for it. All the
and I've got
stuff.
Yeah, I got a perfect clip that highlights that too. There was recently a debate between Chris Cuomo, formerly of CNN. He took part in a debate about COVID and I think some related topics recently against comedian and political commentator Dave Smith. And we have a segment that I think really highlights it. Again, I think this understates it, but this journalistic malpractice that was rampant during the years of COVID. So if we have that clip ready, let's go ahead and play that Cuomo clip, please.
There was so much talk that they don't want you to take ivermectin. Ivermectin is the way to go. Take it. Joe Rogan got better from ivermectin. And by the way, I don't like what people did to Joe Rogan about ivermectin. I don't like it.
You did it.
No. Okay,
yes, you did.
Find the clips.
Dude, find the clips. You shamed Joe Rogan.
Find the
clips. You said he's taking horse dewormer. You and Don Lemon were chuckling at each other about it.
No,
I'll go find
first
the
of all,
clip.
you just saw the clips.
I watched
I'm
it.
not chuckling. I'm listening to Don. But
No. The clip I'm talking about wasn't on there, and it's absolutely there. Here, do we have it? Hold on. Let's play the clip.
Injecting drugs for animals and horse.
And people telling them to. Oh, my God. What person? You talk about cancel culture and who to shame. Ivermectin, a dewormer, really?
They are shaming themselves.
That's what it is.
They're shaming themselves.
So you're taking a dewormer right now.
Chris,
you can't apologize for that. You weren't being clear that it was this, and you know that, dude. You're being so dishonest right now, man.
I'm not being dishonest.
talking about ivermectin, the drug. You were not talking about this version of ivermectin. Come on.
Hey, Donnie, just one more super quick thing before we move on. We also need to remember that the surveillance state, whether it's the CIA, the NSA, and like all those government entities, went to social media platforms saying you cannot say these things. Sure. So the media was, I think, doing that to play along, so they didn't get in trouble with the social media companies and such. So there's a bit of that. I don't think that was like the driving force behind it, but I think early on when we saw what happened to people like Tom Cotton and others who dared to say, hey, wait a second, maybe this is from a lab and maybe masks don't work and maybe shutting down businesses is stupid. What happened to them? They got just railed. They got canceled. So I think that a lot of the other mainstream media outlets and people like Chris Cuomo said, well, I got to go along to get along, and shame on them for doing that, but I do think that there was an aspect of that.
Yeah, and trying to rewrite history as to not apologize for that. When they had the receipts, they played it in front of them. Jim, we're already an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm going to give you final word on all of this, whether it's the journalistic malpractice of the media during the years of COVID or the specific report in regards to the lab leak. Wherever you want to go with it, go for it.
Well, I was so triggered by so much of what Chris said, and he made some of my points. But, first of all, the thing that I remember that I was triggered by was the idea when you asked Donnie, how did this become partisan? We didn't make it partisan. They made it partisan. The regime, the Biden administration, especially, and even when Trump was in office, and he was working on the vaccine, which he hasn't done it a lot lately, and I recommend that Donald Trump, if he wants to continue to have the support of conservatives, to stop mentioning that he was the one responsible for the accelerated vaccine. His base is not impressed by that, to say the least. But it was not, people questioning, the efficacy of an experimental vaccine done to everybody with no testing. Just bringing that up was made partisan by the vaccine pushers and those on the other side, including Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx. Trump was able to get some people like Scott Atlas on the board that he had assembled, the special committee he had assembled about the vaccine and about, COVID prevention policies like school shutdowns, like lockdowns of businesses, the masking, the social distancing, and all of that. Scott Atlas was saying that there's no evidence that all of these policies that we're implementing are ruinous to people's. They steal people's freedom and they're ruinous to the economy and we shouldn't do them. And he was basically just railroaded out of there, and they didn't listen to him because Deborah Birx and, frankly, Mike Pence were in charge of this, and Anthony Fauci and not Scott Atlas. He, of course, was right. So this wasn't made a partisan issue. It was a partisan divide. It was a divide against people who ended up being right, who were right at the time, actually, and people who have since been proven even more right, and those who had the wrong answers and that had the wrong policies that were put in place specifically to stop Donald Trump from winning re-election in 2020. It was because of all of these COVID policies and the shutdowns and the 6 feet of distancing, and that you can't be close to even your loved ones if you don't live in the same house, that you can't have Thanksgiving with more than maybe 3 people. All of these things were put in place to make sure that we had massive mail-in and unmonitored voting to in the 2020 election. The rules of the entire society were thrown into a wood chipper based on a virus in which 99 or 98% of people survived. Even now, as we see the data coming through, the vast majority of people who unfortunately died because they contracted COVID were either elderly, obese, or had some other comorbidity, or all 3 of those things. That it was perfectly fine and no worse than the flu for most people under the age of 50. And if you were a child, there was no reason at all for you to have gotten a vaccine. And so this divide, this partisan divide, was not done by people who had genuine, logical, science-based questions and common sense about the COVID vaccines and all the policies that were put in place. And we were able to experience, and I didn't watch too much of it because it is very triggering to me, Dr. Anthony Fauci testifying in front of the House Oversight Committee this week. He refused to take responsibility for encouraging gain-of-function research through back channels in China by on some technicality that he thinks is legitimate, saying that, you know, what I asked them to do does not meet the definition of what gain-of-function research is, even though it did the exact same thing. But you know, I'm the science, he says. So it doesn't matter that I was caught red-handed illegally funding gain-of-function research, as you said, Donnie, in a 2-bit lab somewhere in communist China. He's not going to take any responsibility for that. He denied that he recommended that schools be shut down and that lockdowns be done. He said there was no science behind 6 feet of separation, which we had mentioned on this podcast several times, because in Europe, this is back in the time, Europe's degree of separation was 3 feet. But we had to have 6 feet. Why? Because Anthony Fauci is the science, and he admits in testimony this week that there were no studies and no science behind that. But it was that 6 feet of separation that made it so that you couldn't run a restaurant in this country. It was 6 feet of separation that had kids playing their instruments in band in school in little tents. It was these mask policies. There were no studies that showed masks worked. In fact, most studies show that they didn't work, especially for a virus of this kind. Didn't matter. We were kicking mothers off of planes with their screaming children because they can't get a mask on a 2-year-old in an airplane. We had families set against each other because of the partisan divide that the regime put in place during the pandemic. And nobody is held accountable for any of this. You can bring Anthony Fauci to as many hearings as you want. He is not going to be held. He's not held accountable for that. He's living in his fantasy world. And every time you question him on these things, he says, it wasn't me that was making those policies. I didn't recommend schools be shut down. Then you show the clip of him saying, it's not safe enough to open up schools. So then what does Anthony Fauci say? It's like, well, you know, I'm just at NIAID. It's the CDC that makes those recommendations. And they're only recommendations. These are not mandates. Right. Anthony Fauci willingly participated in the beatification of him, and because he's the science. But when it's time for the accountability for how much damage his policies and the public health professionals in our government had, when it's time to face the music and take some responsibility for that, they don't want any of that. They just want all of the praise. They want the statues to Fauci being made. They want the little dolls that you can find of Fauci standing proudly. I remember the one time I got the vaccine, I had to because I had to travel. Vaccine mandates, you have no choice. If you need to travel, you need to get the shot. If you are in the Army, you need to get the shot, or you're sent out with a dishonorable discharge. If you were one of the people on the front lines saving people who had COVID before we even knew how to treat it medically. If you don't want to get the shot, screw it. You're fired. You're out. I mean, it's still mind-blowing to me that most people kind of just forget about this. I understand that you want to forget. You want to leave behind mental trauma. I do too. But it is this is why it triggers me when Anthony Fauci's there, because it brings back all of this nonsense that wasn't just inconvenient. It wasn't just annoying. It destroyed people's lives. It ruined people's lives. People committed suicide. And now we see a study that comes out, what they call about excess deaths. And researchers are shocked to learn that there has been a mysterious increase in excess deaths in the last several years. I wonder what happened to everybody on Earth that would explain these excess deaths. And you're not allowed to talk about it. Probably can't talk about it even on this podcast. Maybe you can't even talk about it on Twitter, even though Elon Musk owns it. But, Anthony Fauci testifying and getting off scot-free. And then as Chris pointed out, his underlings bragged in emails that the person in charge of FOIA in their department wasn't there to ensure that the Freedom of Information Act was complied with. Her job was to teach all of the staffers how to evade the Freedom of Information Act by things like using personal emails, like their Gmail account, and then deleting them. Things like purposely misspelling EcoHealth Alliance in an email so that it doesn't show up when you do a word search for a routine FOIA request that the people are entitled to. And all of this happens, and there is no accountability. There is no punishment. So, I mean, I think this isn't exactly analogous to the first part of this podcast when we talked about, there should be laws should be enforced and sicked upon, your political opponents or the other side. Maybe I can put that aside. I will settle for the law being applied to Anthony Fauci and all of his underlings who committed federal crimes by avoiding FOIA on purpose. These are so easily provable. It's one thing to make a mistake when you're in charge of public policy, especially in a pandemic emergency. But it is the unwillingness for any of these people to not only apologize, or take any responsibility for their bad decisions at all. And the reason why they don't do that, because if people are encouraged to question the wisdom and the decision-making of our real ruling class, which are the bureaucrats of the United States of America, not our elected officials. It's the bureaucrats who really run this country and enforce the laws. If they are seen to be anything but infallible, that's problematic because that threatens their power. Even the Pope will admit mistakes, but Anthony Fauci will not, ever. And it's extremely triggering and personal to me. And I think it is to a lot of other people. So, there you go. There's my rant. We're done.
Hey, Donnie, just one more thing on this.
How are you gonna follow that up?
Because I have to say this. This is very important. You talked about the politicalization of this during the vice presidential debates. Kamala Harris, when she was debating then Vice President Mike Pence, said, "I will never take the vaccine if it's made by under the Trump administration." However, 3 months later, when she was in office, she did a complete about-face and said, "You have to take this. You have to." So just think about that. That is how political it was. She wanted to win the election. So she was saying, don't take it if Trump does it. But then when we're in the office, same thing. Now you have to take it. You have no choice. Wow.
Right. During that rant that Jim was doing there, we did get a super chat that was from I'm gonna destroy your name again. Was it Annika? We went over this a few months back. Is that how you pronounce it? Jim shaking his head. Okay, we're gonna go for that. This is for Jim. Thank you for the rants. I needed that today. And you also is a buzzer beater because you won it for America, folks. That is in cash, not pounds. So go USA. But that's going to do it. That is going to do it for us today. We're about an hour and a half long. So you got a little bonus material here on this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. For those audio only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, leave a review for us on iTunes. That'd be greatly appreciated. And join us live when we are streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X and all of that on Thursdays at noon Central Time. You can throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Super chat functionality is enabled, as you have seen through this episode. And if you could also support the show just by hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video, all those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. If you'd like, you could follow us on X at InTheTankPod, and you can send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to the show by emailing us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter/X, at Heartland Inst on Twitter/X, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. And Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
As always, heartland.org. We got a lot of great opinion articles up there. I've been posting a bunch every day this week, so please go check them out. It's really learn a lot about a variety of subjects.
Perfect. And we also have the Climate Realism show that'll be taking place tomorrow at noon Central Time on this very channel. So make sure to check that out. But thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.